So, introduction to operating systems. So I love this little quote. If at first you don't succeed, call it version 1.0. And an operating system is a software that controls the hardware and acts as the user interface. It's the foundation upon which applications can run and you can interact with the hardware within the computer. So what are the basic functions of an operating system? Well, there are three categories of functions that we need to be aware of. The first one is it communicates with hardware, provides users and applications methods to communicate with system hardware. So it is our interface between the human and the hardware that runs the computer. We are not telling the hard drive to do something. We can't tell the mouse to do something. We can't tell the audio card to do something. Heck, I can barely get OBS to do what I'm telling it to do right now. But we need in between, we need an intermediary to allow us as humans to be able to interact with the hardware. And that's what an operating system does. It also, let's take a look at how that works. So we have something called device drivers. Device drivers are instructions for the operating system on how to communicate with specific hardware. Device drivers are instructions for how the operating system can talk to that piece of hardware, and all hardware requires a device driver. So what we're looking at here is a device driver is kind of the instruction manual, the translation manual of how the hardware can talk to the rest of the system, how the hardware can talk to the operating system, and so how we can get it to work. So a few seconds ago, I said that we can't talk directly to a hard drive. We can't tell a hard drive what to do. Instead, if we want to, for example, take something off the hard drive, we want to open up a file. We go through our operating system, we click on something, and the operating system then has to go through its manual. It goes, okay, how am I supposed to talk to this hard drive? And it's going to look at the device drivers on how to work with that hard drive. So that's the device drivers. And I'm being told I've got a sound issue. Let me see if we can adjust this here. There we go. I think we're playing with the sound here. Back and forth, back and forth. There we go. I think we've adjusted the sound issue. My helper saying there was audio differences. The audio differences had to do with the audio capture on the microphone device. I think I got that sorted out enough for right now. So the device driver, like I said, is the instruction manual of how the operating system can communicate with the hardware on the system itself. Okay. So how do we get to the device manager? How do we open up the device manager? So in the search bar, we're going to type device manager. That's the easiest way to get there. In the old days, we used to have to teach students what buttons to click and how to get there. Honestly, for a lot of this stuff with Windows 10 and Windows 11, you just go through the search bar at the bottom. It's a lot faster to find what you need. So you go and you type in device manager. You can right click on any device and click on properties. In the drive property window, select the driver tab. So fairly simple to find. The next one we have to look at is, oh, there we go. We can see it now. For some reason, it was paused when I had it open, but you can see in the animation it working. So that is the device manager. There we go. So the second basic function of an operating system is it creates a structure to access applications, files, and folders. It allows applications to work with the computer, provides a layer for it to communicate, but also gives application structure. It dictates how the applications are stored, how to launch them, and how they are supposed to work. Now, that's a lot of words, right? It kind of sounds like word salad a little bit. What does this actually mean? The operating system is also responsible for the structure of how things work on that computer. And so the operating system is going to specify and create ways where you can access applications. So, for example, you want to run a program. How do you access that application? What do you have to click? Where is that application stored? In Windows, for example, it's stored through different methods compared to how Apple stores, and on their Macs, how they store their applications there. How does it organize its files? How does it organize its folders? Before we're done for the night, we're going to look at NTFS. We're going to look at X4. We're going to take a look at the different ways that we have our files arranged and how we have our hard drive set up. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we get there. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself right now. And then finally, it provides a user interface. The operating system gives us a method to interact with the computer. This is kind of important, right? So we have a computer, we have all this amazing stuff on it, but how do we as humans interact with that computer? How do we open things up? How do we save things? How do we get programs to work? How do we do things that we want to do with the computer? And so the operating system provides us with an interface that we can use in the computer to get things done. Okay, so that is kind of that stuff in a nutshell. Let me make sure I'm looking at our live stream if we have any questions. Question, is it easy for the device manager to corrupt? Good question, really good question on that one. The answer to that is not really. If the device manager is getting corrupt, that's a bigger problem, right? The device manager is kind of a core aspect of how Windows works. And it's very stable. I've never seen device manager get corrupt without the entire Windows operating system get corrupt. Now, I will say this one aspect here, which is devices can get corrupt. Drivers can get corrupt. Sometimes you'll have a setup where, let's say, for example, a drive gets messed up, your sound card gets messed up, or your video card gets messed up. Especially video cards can really cause problems. And what's going on here? Oh, there we go. I'm watching the I'm watching a live feed there. The video card, for example, could become corrupt. The drivers in the video card could become corrupt, and there are methods for fixing that. You can reinstall the drivers. A lot of drivers will come with repair functions. You can go into the device manager and do repairs that way. You can look for updates on drivers. These were a lot more important things to do back in the older days of computers. With more modern Windows, I have very seldom ever had to go into device manager to fix things. It does a really good job of keeping things pretty straight. So, but really good question. Keep in mind, folks, that there is a delay between what you're seeing on screen and what I'm talking about. So if you ask a question in chat, I can see it, I'm going to see it in real time, but it might take a little bit of time for me to respond to it just because of the delay that we have. Okay. All right. Good questions. Love the questions. Keep them coming. Let's continue on in our look at the basic functions of operating systems, or operating systems in general. All right, let's hop over to licensing. So we have different types of licensing. The operating system, as well as software in general, can be released under various types of licenses. A software license is a contract between the creators of the software and the users. Generally, they define how the software can be distributed, used, and whether others can see the source code, i.e. the program's coding. Now, let me break this down a little more detail before we go into these individually. So licensing of software can dictate how they can be distributed, how they can be gotten out there, right? You sell them, you give them away, you download them. How do people get their hands on that software? So distribution can be part of the licensing requirement. How it is used is definitely part of most licensing requirements. How are you authorized to use this particular software? Can you use the software this way? Is another way prohibited? How many people can use it? Those kind of things can affect the licensing. And finally, the source code. And I want to talk about source code next because this gets a little bit more geeky here. So consider source code as the recipe of how a program is created. It is the programming code used to make the operating system or application. Source code is created by people who use programming languages to develop the software, and you have something called a kernel. The kernel is the very heart of the operating system. So again, kind of breaking this down, the source code is kind of the engine under the hood. Okay, you have a car, you have an engine that makes the car go vroom. Okay, the engine is the source code. It is what causes the car to move. And engines, even though they can be very similar, they're also different. Okay, they have different ways to function, although the general mechanics are there. I'm not a car person, so I'm not going to go too far down this analogy before I completely mess this one up. But your engine is the source code. It is what makes this thing work. And in some vehicles, the hood of the car, which is where the engine's held, I believe, again, I'm not a car person, but I'm fairly sure it's under the hood. The hood could be welded shut and you can't see the engine. And other cars, the engine, you can see, you can open the hood. So, but the source code is, at the end of the day, what makes the car or what makes the program work. And you can have what we call closed source or proprietary, and you can have open source, which we'll hop into in a second. So closed source is the source code is kept secret. It's known as closed source or proprietary. And a great example of this is Windows. Windows is a good example of a closed source operating system. While open source is, you can see what's under the hood. You can see the code that makes up the operating system. And good examples of this are the many distributions of Linux. So if you're confused, let me go back into something I do know about, which is cooking. Okay. I have been told that I make a really good fudge. And I'm not a fudge person, which is weird, but I'm told I make a pretty good fudge. And the fudge recipe is actually from a website. It's a recipe website. Anyone can go to this website and find the recipe for the fudge that I make. You can learn how much chocolate goes in there. You can learn how much marshmallow, how much sugar. All that stuff is in the recipe that anybody can see. That's open source. Now, because it's open source, I can also tweak some things. So, for example, a good cooking tip for you is anytime you're using chocolate, add a little cinnamon because it helps enhances the flavor of chocolate. That's my little twist on that recipe. And so I took an open source, a recipe, made some changes to it, and kind of improved it as far as I'm concerned and what people like. Now, that's different, for example, than Coca-Cola. If you get a Coca-Cola or a Coke, the recipe of Coke is a very well-guarded secret, right? It's supposed to be very, very secret. Or let's say you like KFC chicken with its herbs and spices, its proprietary secret, recipe. That's a secret. You can't see what the recipe is. They protect that secret. That is considered closed source. So kind of a cool analogy. I hope that helps you understand what's going on there. Okay, so just because a developer chooses the open source route doesn't mean that they give up their intellectual property or that someone can claim their work as their own. Usually the user who tweaks open source code must give credit back to the original product or other restrictions. So just because something is open source doesn't mean you get to copy it and use it and call it yours. There's different licenses and different licensing agreements where if you do make a change, you have to give credit back to whoever created the original code or whichever version you have, okay? Let's take a look at distribution. Let me check in real fast on our YouTube channel. Let's see how we're doing here. and see if we are doing okay as far as our delay and our latency. Everything looks pretty good. Okay, cool. Let's continue. So distribution. Like I said earlier, distribution is how the software gets out there. It's how that software gets out into the hands of people so they can use it. Distribution can take many forms. The big four that we most talk about are something called freeware, shareware, freemium, and proprietary. And here is a quick summary of what each of these are. So freeware is usually proprietary. It's free to distribute and free to use. There is a program that I absolutely love that I teach about. It's called CPU-Z. If you are on a PC or you have a Droid phone, CPU-Z is a fantastic program. It tells you a lot about your device. It is freeware. You don't pay for it, but it belongs to the people who created it. It is proprietary. You just don't get to slap your name on it and say, look what I created. It belongs to them. Their intellectual property or IP remains theirs. The maker of the software usually sets their own end-user licensing agreement, otherwise known as a EULA. You definitely need to know what that word means. Let me time out for a second. On the certification tests, whether you're working on your Tech Plus certification or whether you're a teacher working in your technology application certification, they do love their abbreviations. And so you need to learn maybe not what the abbreviation word for word means, but what it means in general. So for example, I may not remember what a EULA stands for. I may go, oh, is it end user license agreement or is it end user license acceptance? That doesn't matter. Okay. They're not going to ask you what word does this stand for. They're going to want you to know what it actually means. What's the concept? What's done because of this? So a EULA is the thing that you agree to as the end user. These are kind of the contracts you sign with the company to use their software. This is what you agree to. But again, the bigger point here is that on certification exams, the tests usually use the abbreviations. They're not asking you to say, which of the following does this actually stand for? They want you to understand the concept behind the abbreviation. So I hope that helps and hope you guys, hopes that prevents somebody from missing a question because of some abbreviation, because that is very frustrating. All right, let's take a look at shareware. Shareware is proprietary and can be shared freely. Thus the name shareware. The program might be set as a trial where the user can try it before they buy it, or they could have features locked behind a purchase or subscription model. Then we have freemium. Freemium is proprietary software. The functionality and features can usually be expanded if the user pays extra for different function items or access. And then, of course, you have proprietary. Proprietary means property of software publishers. Someone pays access to the software. Software isn't free to use, and the developer maintains ownership of this. So here are some common examples that you might be aware of. A good example of freeware, like I said earlier, is CPU-Z, while a classic example of shareware is Doom. That's how it got out there back in the day. Freemium, for example, would be Spotify, where you can have your free access, but if you want extra access, then you got to pay for it. And then, of course, you have proprietary, which is Windows. Let me kind of expand a little bit on freemium. Freemium, it's good and bad in some ways. If it's done properly, people like it. So, for example, I use iHeartRadio. Some folks use Spotify. I get commercials. If you use Spotify, I'm sure you get commercials too. If you want to pay a little bit extra, you unlock additional features. You would unlock additional things about it. We also see this right now with the AIs like ChatGPT and Claude, where if you have a free account, you can do stuff. But if you pay more, you can do even more stuff. And some companies are pretty decent with their freemium stuff. And then some companies, especially when they mix the freemium and they're proprietary together. For example, Star Wars Battlefront, we're looking at you. Okay. So they got in big trouble for that as well. They should, because you're paying top dollar for the product. You're paying a lot of money for the product, and then they're going to charge you additional money for extra stuff. So it's like pick a lane and stick with it. Question from the comments. Let me pull that over so I can take a look at that. Give me a second here. Are there any risks of freeware, shareware, freemium that should be considered? Not well. I hate to be definitive when it comes to technology, because the moment you're definitive and you say absolutely yes or absolutely no, there's going to be somebody out there in somebody's basement who's going to say, well, actually, so I always hate to use absolutes. I would say that the danger comes in with the manufacturer and the publisher of the software. You have some companies that are very money hungry when it comes to your proprietary software. You have some companies that really kind of double dip with having the proprietary and the freemium. I would say there's no damage specifically or danger when it comes to things like malware if you're getting them from reputable sources. But be it known, know this, which is whales. I think South Park did an episode about this. I've seen other people do this, especially for mobile games, where the mobile game model to make money, to make a lot of money, is getting a very small percentage of people who are going to spend a lot of money on their game. So, for example, I have a game on my phone. I kind of fell for it. It's called Last Asylum. What is it called? Last Asylum Plague something, or Last Asylum Plague Dark. Anyways, so I got it for the phone. And of course, you hit the time wait, right? You hit the paywall. You hit the you got to wait for something to renew. You got to have your time delay. Here's some diamonds. You can buy more diamonds if you want, and those are freemium things where most people aren't going to spend a lot of money on it. But they also know they're targeting a very small percentage of people. I'm not saying this particular program is doing that. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying it's a well-known model in mobile games, especially, where they will go after these huge whales that'll spend tons and tons and tons and tons of money to unlock different features. Sadly, sometimes these happen to be kids who get a hold of the parents' credit cards, and then all sorts of bad things happen. So really good question, and thank you very much for that question. Okay, let's take a look at software compatibility. Give me 1 second. I'm going to type something to my assistant here. Which is basically, please chime me when somebody asks a question in chat, because he can see it in real time. And I am kind of looking at, I've got 3 different monitors in front of me. I got OBS over there. I've got the PowerPoint over here, and I've got this thing here. Okay, so Xander, who's my oldest son and my assistant, will ping me if there are questions coming through in chat that I'm not aware of. Okay. And guys, I greatly appreciate, let me just say, I greatly appreciate your patience today. First time we've done these live streams, of course, we're going to run into technical issues, from not having the ability to live stream on the channel we wanted to trying to get OBS to work correctly. And it's not OBS's problem. It's been a long time since I've had to play with this. So again, I greatly appreciate your patience. This is the first one. By the time we get to next week, it'll be all polished. I'll probably have theme music. I'll have my books back over here. I got them back from Amazon. They should be in here tomorrow. So again, appreciate your patience on this. Okay, so back to software compatibility. So compatibility, all software is designed with a target platform in mind. Not only does the software have to be compatible with the operating system, but also the versions of the operating system. So for example, if you have a copy of Windows 11 and you have a game from way, way, way back in the day, it may not work with that version of Windows because it's just too old and the new version of Windows doesn't support it. So it has to be compatible not only with the operating system, but the version of the operating system. It also has to be compatible with the hardware on the computer that's going to run it. These considerations, the type of operating systems or hardware needed to run a program, collectively are called either system requirements or compatibility requirements. And here is an example of a game. I believe this is 7 Days to Die? I think this is 7 Days to Die. 7 Days to Die, which had been in alpha for over 10 years. Believe it's still in alpha, although they said it's still an early release, even though they said it's not. But typically the most important items are operating systems, the memory required, processing, and storage. For those of you who are high-end gamers, you need to pay particular attention to the video requirements. And like I said, this particular screen capture is from a game called 7 Days to Die. Notice we have your system requirements for Windows and you have your system requirements for Mac OS. Now, here is a important tip for you, which is just because you meet the system minimum requirements doesn't mean you're going to have a good time. System minimal requirements is it will limp along on your computer, but it won't do very good. It'll just kind of hang in there. You want to meet at least the recommended or even better. And this caused, back when I was young, no shortage of consternation when I would be in a Babbage's. Don't judge, it's been a long time. Having to take a look at the box that the system requirements and go, oh man, I don't know if my computer can run this. I might need to go buy a new stick of RAM or what have you. And in fact, a lot of us older tech geeks, which, I got the gray hair to show, I'm one of the old geeks now. A lot of us got into computers because we wanted to play video games. It wasn't really looking at it as a profession or a career. It was, we just wanted to play video games. And we had to learn how to fix our computers and build our computers and modify our computers. So there we go. All right, so let's take a look at 32-bit versus 64-bit. As discussed in a hardware chapter, if you were in my live face-to-face lecture, if not, this is discussed in the previous unit. The hardware, we can usually have a 32-bit or a 64-bit CPU, a 64-bit processor. The operating system and applications can also be 32-bit or 64-bit. Now, I would say today in our modern age, we're in a 64-bit world. When I was initially teaching computer maintenance and A+ certification, we were in the transition from 32-bit to 64-bit. So it was kind of like you could be either one, but now, unless you have a special need, you're probably running a 64-bit CPU in your computer, and you're probably running a 64-bit operating system, although you may not be running all 64-bit applications because maybe they don't need it. You wouldn't notice it, okay? RAM, 64-bit operating systems can support a lot more RAM than the 32-bit operating system. 32-bit operating systems maxed out at 4 gigs of addressable RAM, while a 64-bit operating system can hit this maximum depending on the operating system. I'm going to take a sip of my hot chocolate. And continue on here. So 64-bit operating systems can support a great deal more RAM than our old operating systems. Now, keep in mind, now this is the operating system. This is the operating system limiting the RAM that it can address, that it can work with. The 64-bit CPU, however, itself can support a ton more RAM than we can work with right now. We don't have motherboards that have enough RAM slots that can handle 64-bit CPUs. They can't max them out, is what I'm saying. Versus the old days where, yeah, a 32-bit CPU, you can max out the RAM, not because of the operating system, but because of the CPU itself. With 64-bit CPUs, we can't max that out yet. They don't make RAM chips that big enough to max out our home computers, which is kind of cool if you think about it, because that means that there's still a lot more stuff that we can do down the road. So working in Windows, you can click on the Start button, the button with the Windows icon, usually on the bottom left side of the screen. Click on Settings. It looks like a little gear. Click on Systems, scroll down and click on About and look for the label that says System Type, and you can find out what you are running in your computer. Now, this is Windows 10 that I'm showing here, but the idea is pretty much the same when you're looking at Windows 11. If you just type in your search area, About or System Information, you can find that information as well. Programs don't necessarily have to be 64-bit. They can be 32-bit or less, depending on what you want to use. And there's ways to find that out. If you go to your task manager and you can kind of scroll down, you can go look and you can find a different box you can check that will show you whether or not it's 32-bit or 64-bit program. And you can see here in the screen capture, in the animation, we have 64-bit applications and it goes down to 32-bit. And again, this is mostly because of the program just doesn't need it. It doesn't really make that much of an impact. Now, working with a Mac, you can see what you have. Fairly simpler, I think, by just going to System Menu. That's the Apple icon on the top left side of the screen. Select About This Mac and go from there. Okay, let's take a look at categories of operating systems. Now, what if I was to tell you that there are only 3 operating systems on the market? Only 3. That's it. You have Windows and all the versions of Windows. You have macOS and all the versions of macOS. And you have Linux, and that's it. That was it. Just 3 operating systems total out there. Would I be correct? No, absolutely not. I'm not. No, that's wrong. Nope. Thank you for playing. There we go. No soup for you. Okay. So, in fact, we have different categories of operating systems. Okay. We have our mobile device operating systems. We have our workstation operating systems. We have server operating systems, and we have embedded operating systems. And it just occurred to me that you probably were not hearing the sound effects that I hit. Let me see if you can hear this. I just hit this one. There we go. All right. Again, working out the bugs. So we have different categories of operating systems. Let's take a look first at our mobile devices. It wasn't that long ago that we weren't even talking about mobile devices, but because of how much they've blown up over the years, we absolutely positively have to address mobile phones when we're talking about operating systems. And so our 4 operating systems that we've had for mobile devices were the BlackBerry OS, which has been discontinued, the Windows Mobile, which has been discontinued, iOS, and Android. So the first one was the BlackBerry. The BlackBerry operating system was incredibly popular. It was used with the BlackBerry smartphones. It's no longer being developed, but this was like really cool back in the day. Though I remember my very first smartphone was a BlackBerry, and I felt so cool, right? I had my little thing on my belt where I could put my phone in. I could play Snake with a little trackball. BlackBerries were awesome. In fact, President Obama, when he became president, he created some questions for security because he had his BlackBerry and he wanted to continue to use his BlackBerry even though he was president. And so they had to figure out how to secure and make safe his phone so that he could use it. Obviously, things have evolved, but Obama, whether you liked him as a president or not, for this particular example, it doesn't matter. But he was the first president who wanted to use his mobile device, and his first mobile device was a BlackBerry phone, which is kind of cool. I will say that following the events of 9/11, the terrorist attack in New York, the FBI wound up getting a lot of BlackBerries because they found out just like everybody else did, that during a disaster like that, that phone signals don't go through. Cell phone signals may not go through because the cell towers are just overwhelmed, but texting has a much better chance to go through. And so because of that, at least the FBI, and I'm sure a lot of other law enforcement agencies out there, brought in smartphones because they could text, and they had a better chance of texting getting through when the cell towers were just absolutely overwhelmed. By the way, remember that, because cell towers still get overwhelmed during natural disasters. A cell tower cannot handle, generally, if everybody makes a phone call on that cell tower at the same time, but try texting. So if there's an emergency, a hurricane, tornado, earthquake, flood, texting is your better chance of getting through in case you need help. So just FYI there. All right, next one is Windows Mobile. Windows Mobile, Microsoft kind of got to the game a little late on that one. They were like, "Oh wait, we're losing the market share," and so Microsoft came out with Windows Mobile. It went the way of the Zune. If you don't know what the Zune is, that's fine. It was their competitor to the iPhone. Also didn't do very well. Then we had iOS. iOS is very popular still out today, formerly known as the iPhone OS or the iPhone operating system. It's proprietary operating system. It belongs to Apple. It works on Apple devices, and it is the second most popular operating system currently on the market. The most popular operating system on the market, of course, is the Android. It's one of my favorites, the one I use, based on a modified kernel of Linux. Remember, we said kernel is the kind of core of an operating system. And most versions are proprietary, and the release of the version is controlled by your carrier. Let me pause here because this is pretty cool. My family, we have T-Mobile, and we all have T-Mobile, and we all have different phones. And so one of us might get an update to Android while the other ones don't get an update, and then somebody else might get the update, and then we wait for anyone else. But your provider learn, okay, we got the update, but then they release the update based off of their version, off of what they do, as well as what your phone is in case it's compatible or not. So it's not like Windows releases an update and everybody gets a Windows update. Linux or Droid will release the update, and it's up to your carrier to determine when. Okay, I've got a comment in our thing. Thank you, Xander, for bringing my attention to it. Do landlines run on any of these OSs? No, with a caveat, with a huge caveat. Let me put this is a big caveat, okay? Big caveat. Your traditional phone that you have at home doesn't run on these operating systems, okay? The old-fashioned phone, you pick it up and you hear the line, you're fine. Now, here's where the caveat comes in. If you have a phone that is connected to, let's say, a networking cable, a phone like we had at our school, which was run on the Cisco network, that runs off the network itself, a VoIP phone, a voice over IP, then it has an operating system built in. I would say that's more of a proprietary operating system. We'll talk about those in just a second. But the traditional landline, the traditional phone, it's just a traditional phone. But if you're at work and your phone is connected to the network, and you can tell because your phone is connected to a cable, it comes out of the wall, then your phone connects to your computer. There's usually a proprietary operating system running on that because of the network. It's all, and we'll talk about that in a few seconds here, but really good questions. I love the questions. Be sure to keep them coming in. Xander, thank you for pinging me when the questions come in. Okay. Got back to, there we go. So that's Droid. So we've talked about our mobile operating systems. Now let's take all our workstation operating systems. These are the operating systems that most people are going to be familiar with. This is the ones that you are used to using. They support networking, productivity, software, games, all that fun stuff. And our big three are Windows, macOS, and Linux. So Windows, I think everybody's familiar with Windows. It has several different editions of Windows over the years. It's considered something called a GUI, which stands for Graphic User Interface. You might also hear the term WIMP, which stands for Windows Icon Menu and Pointer. And this is kind of what caused operating systems to blow up, was the graphic user interface, because before then it was all text-based. Windows 10 was released back in 2015. It was designed to replace Windows 8.1. There was no Windows 9. Don't try to count the number of Windows. You'll go crazy. It's supposed to be the last version of Windows. Yeah, it was supposed to be the last version of Windows. When they released Windows 10, Microsoft was like, this was the last version of Windows. And we're like, are you sure? And they're like, yep, absolutely no other Windows besides this. We're just going to release updates and features and all this other stuff. But Windows 10 is it. We're done. No more Windows. And then Windows 11 was released. So they lied. They lied to us. Windows 10, there's been several versions of Windows 10 that are available, even though Windows 10, now let me kind of back up here for a second, because if you are studying for your Tech Plus or you're studying for your Texas Teacher Tech App certification, one of the things you have to remember is these tests were written however long ago they were written. The Tech Plus isn't that old. It's about a year or so old, so the questions shouldn't be too ancient. The Texas Teacher App, good luck. I mean, they may not even know Windows 10 came out yet. Who knows? But the point here is that Windows 10 is no longer supported. It's reached its end of life. Microsoft no longer supports Windows 10, technically. And you might have a question asking, what's the modern version of Windows? Well, let's say you're on the Texas Teacher Test and it says, what's the modern version of Windows? And it lists Windows 10 without listing Windows 11. Well, Windows 10 technically is not the right answer, right? Windows 11 is the newest version of Windows. Windows 10 is no longer supported, but you also have to think of when the test was written. And when that test was written, was this actually correct? So just be aware of that. It's a testing strategy. It is what it is. Okay, so Windows 10 has some pretty cool features. It had integration with Microsoft OneDrive. Okay, maybe not that cool of a feature. Built-in anti-malware protection using Windows Defender. You had Cortana, Microsoft's version of Siri or Alexa. Like I said, depending on when the test was written. Okay, Cortana is right. We no longer have Cortana, right? Cortana's gone. Now we got Copilot. So just be aware of that. Again, it's one of those age things. Then we have Windows 11, the current version of Windows. It was released in 2021. It is a free upgrade from Windows 10 if your system can handle it. Some systems can't. One of the problems we had back in our school district was those computers were updated from Windows 8 to Windows 10. Well, they didn't do really good from Windows to 11. So problem there. Some of the different user interface changes, like the location of the start menu, they put that thing in the middle of the screen for some god unknown reason. You can move it back to the left. Skype is not bundled. Team Chats was initially integrated but removed in 2023. You can still download it as a separate app. And Internet Explorer was replaced by Microsoft Edge. Still not falling for it. To me, it's still Windows Internet Explorer. Then we have macOS. macOS is Apple's operating system designed to run on Apple's desktops and laptops. It was built off of Unix, initially released in 2001. Originally, macOS was known as macOS 10, then just OS 10. macOS is the second most used operating system for desktops. I saw a question pop up in the chat here, which is, how would we know if a system can handle Windows 11? If it is a, yeah, you're true about Edge. If it is a relatively new computer, it should be able to handle it. If you're upgrading from Windows 8 to Windows 10 and then Windows 10 to Windows 11, not so much. Windows typically will have a system in place. Let me see if I can find it real fast here. Where they would release a thing so you could run it on your computer. I've seen it before in the past when they ran Windows XP to Windows Vista and Vista to 7, they would launch a diagnostic program that you could run on your Windows to see if it could handle the update. Basically, with Windows 11, is a TPM. One of the things that Windows 11 did is it adopted kind of this much more secure posture. And so they brought in a TPM requirement for that. So I've got a computer that I've had for 4 or 5 years. It runs Windows 10. I'm not upgrading to Windows 11 just because I don't really want the hassle of it possibly dying. Plus, to answer another question, which is also in chat, which is how long do typical computers last? A desktop computer can last anywhere between 3 to 5 years on average. A laptop's about 2 to 3 years, depending on who you're reading, depending on what you do with the computer. Remember, these are averages. A desktop computer, I would say, is good for about 5 or so years if you baby it, if you do upgrades. A laptop, because of the nature of a laptop, because you are carrying it around, because you are using it, and it does tend to get banged around a little bit more, less time than that. Okay, so outstanding questions there. All right, let me hop back into this mode. Very good questions, guys. I appreciate them. All right, so macOS. Something else to be very much aware of as far as the testing goes is Apple uses code names for its Mac OS versions. It started with big cat names, and then they ran out of big cats, and now they're calling them things in California. So they're named after different places in California. To see the version on a Mac, click on the Apple menu and About This Mac. Linux, a family of open source operating systems based off the Linux kernel. Lots of variations of Linux available. These different variations are called distributions, or as the cool kids call them, distros. And there are so many distros out there to choose from, and they have different purposes. So for example, I've got a Raspberry Pi that runs a special distro of Linux specifically designed to emulate old arcade games. So this is a very specific version of distro of Linux that's designed specifically to run on Raspberry Pis and to be an emulator for computer games, of classic computer games. You can have other distros of Linux that, for example, mimic Windows. So for folks who don't want to go to Windows 11, they can put this in and stay in kind of a same environment as Windows 10. This might be something that folks want to take a look at. If you have an older computer and Windows is no longer supporting your version of Windows 10, maybe take a look at a distro of Linux. And you can Google this or ChatGPT this of which version of Linux would be the most compatible or most familiar for a Windows 10 user. Those things are out there. Some of the distributions you might hear of are Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, and Linux Mint. And by the way, this is no way a complete list of the different distros out there. There are so many. Then we have server operating systems. Server operating systems are designed specifically with servers in mind and the special things that are required of servers to do. Some examples are Windows Server, macOS Server, which was discontinued in April 2022. So if you see a test and it's asking you of these three, if the test was written before 2022, let me try that again with actual words. Mac OS Server is an example of that operating system, and of course, Linux Server, very, very popular. And finally, embedded systems. These are specially designed operating systems used for very specific devices. You find these built into game controllers, or game consoles, I should say, TVs, network routers, watches, laundry, washing machines, all sorts of things like that. They are specifically designed with that hardware in mind, so they are very stable. And depending on the device, you might be able to update the operating system. In fact, if you're using a router, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you check to see if there's updates. And no, I can't tell you how to update your router because they are so different from each other. We have the Eros from Amazon, and we can update the router through our smart devices. So we can do it through our phone, and it works just fine. Okay, I want to pivot for just a moment. I want to have a little fun with you all. And one of the things I want to do is we are going to play a game of Kahoot. So we're going to play a little Kahoot game. Let me start her up and let me share what's going to happen here. I'm going to switch screens and you're going to see a QR code. If you're on your phone, you can scan the QR code. If you're on your computer, if you go to Kahoot, you type in the game pin and it will take you to this game. So let me show you. This is how we're going to play. So here is the QR code. Let me make that bigger for all you to see. This is for your phone. You can play on your phone, or you can go to kahoot.it and type in your game pin and join in. We'll start up in a few minutes. Let me give you guys, my clock is saying 6:58. Of course, there's a delay. At 7:01 or 7:02, we'll start the game. So join in and we'll play. There's 10 questions. We'll see how well you do. So join in Kahoot right now. All right, my clock is saying 7 o'clock. I'm going to give you 2 more minutes to sign in. By the time you hear this, it might be already there. So at 7:02, I'm going to start the game up. So again, you can scan the QR code or go to kahoot.it, enter your PIN number, and join. If you're watching this after the fact, after the live stream, obviously you can probably skip ahead in the video. All right, less than a minute left before we start the game up. All right. The cool thing about this is that even with the delay, if you're playing on your phone or your computer, you're going to be able to see the questions in real time. Okay. All right, let's play Kahoot. Operating Systems Part 1. What is the main job of an operating system? Is it protect only against viruses, create websites, store files permanently, or run the computer and manage hardware software? That is run the computer and manage hardware software. Good job. Everybody got that one right. In our leaderboard, Winged Llama, followed by Clever Viper. All right, question number 2. Which of the following is an example of an operating system? Is it Microsoft Word, Google Chrome, Windows 11, or HDMI? You get points for the correct answer as well as how quickly you answer that question. That would, of course, be Windows 11, although some people would argue that may not be a real operating system at all. Let's see what that does to our scoreboard. Oh, Clever Viper taking the lead. Question number 3. What does a graphical user interface, or GUI, allow users to do? A. Format a hard drive automatically. Replace the CPU. Only type commands. Use icons, windows, and menus. And you see Digiford. That's my alternative ego up there. And that, of course, is right. Use icon, windows, and menus. See what our leaderboard is. Ooh, Clever Viper holding the lead. Still anyone's game. There are double point questions in here. Question number 4. For double points, speaking of that, which interface usually requires the user to type text commands? Is it a GUI, a file explorer, a touchscreen, or CLI? It is a CLI. We're going to learn about that before tonight is over. Let's see what our points look like. Clever Viper is still holding the lead. On the heel of Clever Viper is Winged Llama. Next question, question number 5. What does open source software allow users to access? A, the source code. B, serial numbers, the monitor settings, the computer serial numbers, or only the desktop background? Looks like I've got to fix an answer choice. The source code. Clever Viper holding that lead. Question number 6. Which type of software license usually lets you try the software before deciding whether to pay for it? Is it freeware, open source, shareware, or proprietary? It is shareware. See what our scoreboard looks like. Ooh, Miraculous Squids getting on up there. Question number 7. Double points, still anybody's game. What does software compatibility mean? Does it mean some software only works with certain operating systems or hardware? It makes the screen bigger. It prevents all malware, or it makes files smaller. A, some software only works with certain operating systems or hardware. Clever Viper still maintaining that lead. Question number 8. What type of operating system is built into devices like smart TVs, routers, cars, and game consoles? Is it server OS, mobile OS, workstation OS, or embedded OS? That would be embedded OS, embedded operating systems built in. All right. Next question, question number 9. What type of operating system is designed for phones and tablets? Is it desktop operating system, mobile operating system, server operating systems, or embedded operating systems? That would be mobile operating systems. Very good. All right, last question. Geek alert. In Star Wars, what is the name of Han Solo's famous ship? Like to mix it up a little bit there. That is closest to royalty-free image I could find of this ship. It is the Millennial Falcon. Very good. All right, let's see. Who came in third place? Miraculous Squid coming in third, followed by Winged Llama coming in second and coming in first. Clever Viper. Good job, everybody. All right, that was a little fun. I got one last Kahoot for you before we call it a night. That'll be at the end of tonight, and I do plan on stopping around 8. But we'll have our last Kahoot before you guys go away for the rest of the night. A little bit of fun there, kind of break things up for you. All right, let us hop back into our lesson by taking a look at the user interface. So let me pop back over to OBS here. Where did you go, OBS? Where is my OBS? There we go. Now I can see what I am showing you all on the screen. Okay, so user interface. The operating system. I'm sorry. I'm still in I'm still in game host voice there. Hey, welcome back. We're in the interface basics now. Okay, back to teacher voice here. So interface basics. The operating system interface, user interface, is how we interact with the operating system and programs. Like I said at the beginning kind of our conversation, it's how we work with it. There are two families when it comes to interfaces. We have, of course, the graphic interface and a text-based interface. The GUI, the graphic interface, is what you're familiar with. This is the one that's warm and cozy and it's not scary. You click on things, things happen, things open, all that stuff. And we call it a GUI, a GUI. It's a GUI interface. And when the computers were kind of taking over everything in the computer revolution, Windows and macOS were or Apple were in a race to create a graphic user interface because they knew that was how things were going to go. People did not want to have to use commands, and it's funny. Well, let me hold off on that story for just a second here. One of the things about graphic user interface is that even if you're an Apple person or a Windows person, if you can use one, you can use the other. It's just like renting a car. So in my career, I've had to do a lot of car rentals, and I might be renting this one car from this company, and a few months later, I might be renting a different car from another company. Well, the gas pedals are still in the same place. The brake pedals are still in the same place. What's different might be how I connect to the radio, or where the controls for the radio are, or where the windshield wiper controls are. There's slight differences, but if you can drive one of the cars, you can drive the other cars. And the same thing with a GUI. If you can use macOS, you can use Windows 11. If you can use Windows 11, you can use macOS. You can use most versions of most dishes of Linux if they're GUIs. They're just slightly different, okay? But you get used to them and you're good to go. So one of the differences, for example, is with Windows and macOS is the location of their minimize, maximize, and close button. With a Windows computer, you click on the X, you close out that program. Well, in macOS, closing out that window doesn't close out the program. You actually have to go into the file area and go down and do the quit to actually close out that program. So slightly different, but once you get used to it, you're fine. Then we have the command line interface. Now, before GUIs, there was command line interface. This is how we used to roll back in the day. And if you wanted to get anything done, you would have to type in the commands. You have to learn the commands. You have to type them in. We had DOS, which stood for Disk Operating System. DOS has been dead for many years, but we still have command line interfaces, or CLIs. They're very powerful. They're still here. They're not going anywhere. And if you get into computers in any great detail, you will have to learn certain commands or be comfortable, I should say, working in the command line interface. Now, that doesn't mean you're constantly in it, but you should be able to hop into it, maybe do some review of like, how do I do this command again? But you should be familiar with command line interface. The network admin, security experts, folks like that will use the basics of command line interface as well. You might see these things. Windows uses PowerShell or command prompt. macOS uses that, and most Linux distributions use Bash. Now, there was a question, and I think it was a very inappropriate question on the old ITF Plus certification exam. That was the test before they turned it to Tech Plus, which asked what runs terminal, which is the command line interface for macOS and Linux. What runs terminal in macOS? Well, the answer was Bash. Bash is the programming behind that terminal that you could use. Not much of a fan, and honestly, you really don't need to know that macOS uses ZSH or that Linux uses Bash unless you go more into computers and computer maintenance and things like that. Okay, just know that you can get there and how to get there. In fact, we're going to talk about that in a little more detail now. So, Windows interface. Clicking. GUI operating systems make heavy use of mice to manipulate objects. I think this comes as no surprise. With the mouse, you can use different types of clicking. You can left click is usually how you select something. You can double left click. This means you're opening or launching something. A right click is usually content sensitive and will open up menus that you can choose from. With maybe the exception of Windows 8, the interface has been similar from version to version. Windows 8 really kind of shook things up because it was very different from what we normally experience when we're working with Windows. The next few slides, we're going to take a look at Windows 10 interface. But honestly, if you know what the Windows 10 interface is, you can figure out Windows 11. You can figure out Windows XP. You can figure out Windows Vista. Windows 8, again, was the outlier because it was just, what's going on here? Where's my start button? And in Windows 8.1, they brought back the start button. We missed it. All right, so this is your desktop. That's your desktop. That's where the background of what you're working on. Okay, it's like the top of a desk. That's why it's called a desktop. You have icons on the desktop. These would be called desktop icons. Again, this isn't rocket science, just basic stuff. This is the start button. Okay, so that's the start button. You click on it, you see all sorts of things. Windows 11 by default has the start button in the center of the desktop, but you can move it to the traditional location. That's what I did with mine. And again, Windows 8 did not have a start button. People did not like that. And in Windows 8.1, they were forced to bring it back. Taskbar, that's the bar on the bottom, displays icons of applications that are running, pinned applications, search box, notification area. You can customize this a great deal as well. You have a search box and notification area, a search box used to search for files, folders, all that good stuff. Your notification area is where you see notifications of programs that are running, as well as different things that might be happening on your computer, time, all that good stuff. When you click on the start menu or start button, you get the start menu. This is probably your main interface with Windows. This is where your applications are at. This is where you find files, all sorts of things like this. If you right click on it, you get additional functionality. So if you right click on the start button, it opens up a menu. In fact, I would say if you're on a PC right now or Windows computer, try right clicking on your start button. If you've never done that before, Windows 10 or Windows 11, it opens up a lot of really powerful tools that you may not knew were just hiding there. So right click on your start button and you'll be like, oh, wow, I did not know I had all of this power. This is pretty darn cool. We have, of course, keyboard shortcuts. Shortcuts are there to, the theory behind shortcuts is that if you have to take your hands off the keyboard, put them on the mouse, you're slowing yourself down. You're losing efficiency. And so by keyboard shortcuts, you can keep your hands on the keyboard and increase your speed, increase your efficiency. And there are some keyboard shortcuts that you should be very familiar with because you probably use them a lot. If you just push the Windows logo by itself, it will open up the Start menu. If you hold the Windows logo on your keyboard and R, it runs the Run command. Windows logo and D minimizes everything to your desktop. Windows logo and L is a very cool function. It will actually lock your computer down. Now, some places this might be disabled. So, for example, when I was teaching this back in high school, I was surprised that for some reason this was turned off for the students. The students could not lock their screens when they went away. That to me seemed like a really bad idea because you are your login. So if you are logged in and you walk away and somebody else hops on your computer, yikes. So I would suggest to those of you watching, when you leave your computer at work or whatever, Windows key L, it will pull up your lock screen. And so that way you can make sure only you are using it. I can tell you right now, having worked for the FBI and having worked for as a contractor for the agency, if you walked away from your computer and you didn't lock it, that was a security write-up. That was some serious trouble you got into. Windows logo in A opens the notification pane. Windows logo in E runs your File Explorer. And you can see the other ones. You can see these as well. I don't need to read them to you, all right? Alt-Tab. This is a fun one. The Alt-Tab is your work switch. So your Alt-Tab would switch between open windows or open things that you had. So let's say you're playing a video game and your boss comes in, Alt-Tab, and you can hop to a different window so they didn't know you're playing. My students were freaked out when I knew this because like, you know that? I'm like, please, I was there for the old magics, because they were playing, oh, I'm like, yeah, I know about this. I'm glad you know about it. Let me teach you another one. Try Alt F4. It'll make your computer faster. And of course, they would hit Alt F4. There it is. And, close out their window, close out their video game. That was something fun we used to do back in the world of online role-playing game, like in Warcraft or something, where people would be like, oh, yeah, Alt F4 makes your character go faster, speeds up your internet connection. And then they'd come back a little bit later and go, you guys are jerks, and, I got shut on, whatever. Control Z is your universal save my butt button combo. It undoes your last command. And Control A selects everything. Windows command line, it's a text-based interface. We call it CLI. It's not DOS. Every version of Windows has one of these things built in. They've gotten stronger over the years. And you can open up your command prompt by just doing the Windows logo and R and type in CMD. That will open up your command prompt. You can also go the long way and go through your start menu and all that fun stuff, but why bother doing that? Your command line interface will have a prompt. It has to be very directional on where you're at with that prompt. You type in a command, you press enter, a new prompt is displayed and ready for the next command. So here is an example of the command prompt. Okay. Also, let me see, we're going to try something new here. Let's see, I've got did it work? Did it work? Yes, it did. Let me pull that up over here. Let me show you what we got here. All right, you're seeing actually a lab that I created for our online course. So this is baked into Stackford's site, our Moodle site for different schools. And the problem we had is because command line is so powerful, because people can do damage with it, a lot of schools have disabled command line. So students can't access command line, but we need them to be able to do it. So we would hop in here. We created an entire simulation through Claude Code, which is pretty cool. And we created something where we could mimic the command line. So what you're seeing me do right now is typing in commands into a simulation. This is not actually command line, but in here, I can make directories. Okay. There it is. It's called test. I can hop into that folder or that file or folder, I should say. Okay. There's nothing in there. We'll make a directory. Hi there. We'll do dir, which is a directory. So we actually created, this is pretty cool, by the way. We actually created a way to simulate command line interactions for these kids, which is pretty cool. Again, if I do say so myself. All right, so that's the command prompt. You can change the properties of the command prompt if you want them to be more colorful. You can change the font sizes, the font colors, the window color. I had students make some very interesting color combinations that were god ugly, but hey, they learned how to do it, which is all that mattered. Let's see what else we got. We got some basic commands. Some of you just saw me do. You have, of course, dir, which opens up a directory. It basically shows you everything that's in that folder. This is what we used to have to do back in the day to see everything in that directory. I'm using directories and folders interchangeably. Technically, they're directories. In command line, in the graphic user interface, we call them folders. It's the same general thing, but it's a gooder way to call them directories in command line. Okay. So we can do command prompt. We type dir, and then you can see what's there. We can change directories. This jumps from directory to directory. We have shortcuts. So we can go all the way back to the root drive. We can go back up one folder or one directory. We can switch drives. So again, back in the old days, if you wanted to access, for example, your floppy drive, you would type in it would bring you to the floppy drive. You could hear it load. If you wanted to run something off your DVD drive your CD drive, we're talking old days, you would have to type in D : to go to the CD drive. And that's how we had to do it, kids. We didn't have fun little pictures. We had to type in all the commands manually. Make directory, saw me do that a second ago. These make different directories that you can put things in. Okay. You can rename a directory. So let's say you put in the wrong name for a directory. You go, whoop, I spelled that, or I didn't want that as a name. You could, of course, rename the directory. You could have remove a directory. If it was empty, you type in rd and it removes the directory. As you are working more and more in the command line, things can get cluttered. A CLS command would clear your screen so you could see what was going on. All right, how are we doing out there? Let me hop into the live stream, see if we have any comments here that I need to be aware of. I don't see any. That's cool. Okay. Again, feel free to ask questions, and let's keep going. So macOS interface. If you can navigate around Windows computer, you can absolutely figure out a Mac and vice versa. There's some slight differences, but for the most part, you can figure it out. For example, we have a desktop. Just like the Windows environment, the desktop is a place where you get your work done. It's the background area of the computer where things are placed. Down on the bottom, we have icons. Icons you click on, they open up different programs, and you can go from there. Menu is at the top of the screen by default. Up here, you find your Finder, your File, your Edit, your View, your Go, your Windows, your Help, all that stuff. To the top left side is that little Apple icon. That is the system menu, the Apple logo found on the far left side of the menu. And in here, you have all sorts of goodies that can help you out. To the top right part of the macOS screen by default, you have the toolbar. This is where you find dates, times, as well as networking information, search functions, and other things. At the very bottom, you have something called a dock. The dock is the row at the bottom of the screen. It contains icons of programs, files, and folders. It is very customizable. You can drag things onto it. You can drag things off of it. And of course, we have keyboard shortcuts that you can use in macOS. There is a slight difference between that and Windows. Notice that we have some of these little kind of like weird icons that go next to it. macOS is very fond of not putting this here, but putting the symbol that you're supposed to know next to it. And you can see here on the keyboard, it says command with that little symbol there. Some of the keyboard shortcuts are very, very, very similar. In fact, if I'm using a Mac for quite a bit of time, I find I have to readjust where my pinky goes because it just goes, it's a little, either I think it's a little too far to the left or too far to the right, but it's a slight change. Control and X is going to cut items and put them in the clipboard. Control C, or Command C, I should say, is the same thing as Control C. Command V pastes contents from the clipboard. Command Z undoes. Command A selects everything on the screen. Again, you can see the different keyboard shortcuts that are available. macOS also has a command line, has a very powerful command line. Actually, it's called Terminal, and Apple keeps a very robust guide on how to use Terminal. How to open Terminal, there's a couple ways to get there. You can, of course, just search Terminal. That's the fastest way to get there. Or you can go through Applications and Utilities, double-click on Terminal, and get there that way. You can customize Terminal, of course, make it look differently than it was before. With this, it would come in themes. Windows 11, I will add adopted themes versus how they used to do them. So now in Command Prompt in Windows, you can have a customized theme just like you had in Apple for years beforehand. Finally, we have the Linux terminal, or Linux interface, I should say. There are so many variations of Linux distros that we're just going to cover. We're scratching the absolute surface here, okay? One of the distros of Linux that's typically used for teaching is something called Ubuntu. Ubuntu is pretty cool. You can actually download Ubuntu, put it on a thumb drive, and boot from the thumb drive without actually installing it on your computer. So if you want to try using Ubuntu without installing it and writing over your computer, just run it from a thumb drive and you're good to go. You can play around with it. If you do a lot of travel and you have to use a lot of common computers, it's also security practice where you boot from the thumb drive and run your operating system there so all the malware on that computer doesn't touch you. Desktop, you should know what a desktop is. We saw one in Windows, we saw one in macOS. Well, Linux has desktops too. We have a dock, just like in macOS. In macOS, it defaults in the bottom. At least in Ubuntu, it defaults on the left-hand side of the screen. All of these you can move, of course. All applications, if you go click on the waffle down in the top, the bottom left side on this particular version of Ubuntu, this opens up all sorts of different options, all their programs, all their search features, all that stuff. Top menu, bar along the top of the screen, shows the activities, clock calendars, and notification areas. Activities, found on the top menu. This will open a screen where you can conduct searches as well as select your active workspace. Now, here's something you may not know. Linux, you can have different workspaces open. Mac OS, you can have different workspaces open. Even Windows 11, you can have different workspaces. So you can have a workspace dedicated to work or dedicated to, let's say, communication, one dedicated to games. And you can switch between your workspaces depending on what you're doing for the day. I've known about it for years. Honestly, I've never played with it. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's not something I do. I'm sure people who do this really enjoy it and swear by it, but me personally, I just never kind of caught on to the idea. And then, of course, you've got command line, Ubuntu, and most distros of Linux call it Terminal. Terminal is insanely powerful. All sorts of activities you can do there. You can open Terminal different ways, but here are some commands I did want to cover with you all. A lot of these are very, very similar. Maybe they have slightly different names. So, for example, ls is your directory command. It lists the content of a directory. mkdir, make directory. It makes a directory. rm stands for remove. So it's going to remove directories and files. This is going to fs check. So file system is how your computer organizes files in the operating system. We'll look at what that means in more detail later on. But FSCK is going to check your file system. It's going to check to make sure there's no errors in the file system. And if so, it'll fix them. MKFS is short for make file systems. It'll make a file system. Clear just does what CLS does. It clears your screen. And behold, the great and powerful sudo. Sudo is an abbreviation of super user do, also called substitute user do. At least that's what it used to stand for. I think it just stands for sudo now. But sudo is your ultimate admin privilege. Even Windows, I might add, if you go into command line, you can run it as an admin. But Terminal has this super user access where you can do any of the commands. Well, yeah, you can do any of the commands, but you're doing it as an admin. You are all powerful on that computer. Typically, what ends up happening is you put your sudo command in, it will prompt you for a password, and then you go from there. But sudo is very unique to Linux and the distros, and you should know it, especially for the Tech Plus exam. All right, speaking of file systems, we talked about this a few times, so let's go over file systems real fast. File systems are how operating systems manage files and folders. It's how it organizes things. It's the way it structures the files, it structures where things are located at, it structures where things are stored. That is what a file system does. It's the operating system's organizational data on a hard drive. Several file systems have been developed over the years. As a general rule, as file systems evolve, their ability to use larger and larger hard drives increase. It's much more efficient. They usually add a lot more security and a lot more reliability. And there are 3 families that you need to be aware of, as well as the ones within each of them. So let's take a look first at the granddaddy of them all, and that is FAT. FAT stands for File Allocation Table. FAT16 stood for 16-bit file system. We usually just called it FAT. This is the oldest version of the ones we're going to talk about. It traces its roots back to the 1970s. And when it first came out, it could only support storage volumes of up to 2 gigabytes, because who would ever need anything over 2 gigabytes? I mean, 2 gigabytes was just extravagant. It was just, who needed that much space? Well, obviously things grew from there. And so then it was finally updated to support 4 gigabytes. Well, then FAT32 came out. Oh, I see a question in our chat popping up. Is that why we use WSL for Linux and a Windows? I'm not following that question. If you could clarify your question a little bit more, I will keep an eye on chat and get back to you on that one. Okay. Okay, so FAT32, 32 stands for 32-bit operating system, or 32-bit file systems, I should say. It was introduced with Windows 95 on its second release, on the big service pack release. This allowed us to support partitions of up to 2 terabytes. And I mean, even with that 32, 2 terabytes is pretty darn big. Yes, people have larger hard drive sizes than that, but 2 terabytes is pretty respectable even by today's standards. And most importantly, it's considered a universal file system. So Windows, macOS, Linux operating systems are able to read, in other words, pull information off of it, and then write, save information to it. With Windows 32, FAT32, it is considered a universal file format everybody can use. Then we have exFAT. exFAT stands for Extensible File Allocation Table. Not important, but what is important is that it was designed specifically to deal with USB flash drives and SD cards. As these became more prevalent as well as bigger, they needed a special file system for them, and that is where we find exFAT. FAT32 only works on drives for 2 terabytes or smaller, needed something bigger and newer for flash drives. exFATs can support drives in the petabyte range, so this is pretty darn big. Supported natively by Windows 8 and later versions of macOS, as well as newer versions of Linux. Basically, all versions of modern operating systems can support exFAT without a problem. Then we have NTFS. NTFS stands for New Technology File System. There's a whole story behind it, which we're not going to get into. We don't have time. But it was introduced back in Windows NT. We had Windows NT, Windows 2000, and that kind of family back in 93. Many updates since then. Now it is native in all versions of Windows. So Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, Windows 11. They're all native to NTFS. Has a lot of really cool features. If you go into security, you're going to be very familiar with NTFS. It is proprietary as far as the system goes. let me get back to the question. You know what? That is a really good question. I am going to have my son answer that. Alexander is my oldest son. He is finishing off his associates in networking administration. And Xander, I'm going to let you post the answer to that one. That's a really good question. WSL terminal to execute Linux commands when we're using a Windows computer due to the different file systems. I'm going to let Xander answer that one for you. But the short answer is yes. But I'll let him give maybe a little bit more explanation if you want to. No, you got a good question there. It's a really legit question. I'm going to let Xander address that question because that's more his realm. Plus, I want to see how he answers you. So another question is, from your perspective, what are the most important considerations regarding usability, security, deployment, permissions, integration, and overall system management across each interface? That's a bit to unpack. What do you say the top areas you'd recommend we focus on across the different environments, macOS, Windows, and Linux? For the Tech Plus, you need to know the kind of what we're talking about. You didn't need to go too in depth. So, for example, I'm sorry, I'm going to totally mispronounce your username. It was Alicia, I guess. I'm sorry I'm so sorry if I mispronounce it, but that question that they asked is a lot more in depth. I'm thinking this might be one of the computer students who are working on their Tech Plus or something else. That's more in depth than you would need to go into for the Tech Plus. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't want to mess up your name. From the Tech Plus certification exam, knowing that there's Windows, that there are Mac OS, knowing Linux, knowing what the versions of Windows, the current version of Windows are, the current version of Mac OS is, knowing what the file systems are, you're fine. Now, Alicia asked a really good question, which was, how do we interact with that in a Windows environment? That is a much more advanced question where you might be on a network and you have to access, let's say from a Linux machine, something on a Windows computer, or vice versa. And how do you have that translation? What has to happen is you have a translation between the two because they don't speak native languages. It's no different, for example, than if I was to save and we're going to talk about actually in just a second or two about the file format of a Linux machine. Windows cannot read a Linux file system, can't do it. It's unable to read those. And Linux can read Windows file systems, so there's a disconnect in language. And the question was, who's a translator between these two? That is very advanced concepts for, I wouldn't even say A+ so much as maybe networking, but definitely not Tech Plus. You don't need to know that for Tech Plus at all. So I'm hoping I'm answering the question, but really, really outstanding questions. I'm loving where these questions are coming from. They're very, very good. All right. So let me finish off with our file systems. I'm going to also answer some of the questions out there, but thank you very much for these questions. I'm really, really liking them. So NTFS, again, stands for New File System, was introduced back in the Windows NT world, has a lot of great features, but it's proprietary. Then we have HFS, HFS Plus, and APFS. These are proprietary for Apple computers. HFS. Okay, Alicia, I'm looking at your answer or your follow-up question. That's really good. Avoid Leaf is Xander. So thank you for answering that question. So anyways, HFS, HFS Plus, and APFS, these are all Apple proprietary systems. HFS was the first one from this whole group. Then we have HFS Plus, which was kind of the extended version. But the newest file format system from macOS is the APFS. Easy to remember. It's Apple File System. This is the current one. This is the one that they're going to use by default. Now, looking at Linux machines. Linux, and again, I want to really drive this point home. There are so many distros of Linux, and there's so many use cases for Linux. I had a student in my class last year who used a command line only based Linux. That was what he used. He didn't even use a GUI Linux. So when we're talking about Linux, we're talking about generalities and maybe the most common examples of Linux, because I guarantee you, the minute I say ext4 is what Linux machines use, there'll be somebody out there who has this one distro of Linux that uses some file system that is completely opposite of everything else we talked about. So I would say by and by, at large, with exceptions, this is what you're going to find on most Linux machines. It's ext4, stands for fourth extended file system. It's the default for most versions, supports volumes of a ridiculous amount of size, exabytes, and it's backwards compatible. All right, now kind of going again to the level of questions, which I love the questions. Tech Plus, that's enough. We've talked about file systems enough. We've covered what you need to know about file systems. In the A Plus exam, one of the traditional questions is what you can read to and what you can write to. So, for example, Apple systems, macOS systems can read NTFS. They can read, if you have a thumb drive and you format NTFS, Apple will be able to read what's on that drive. It can't write to what's on that drive traditionally. Windows cannot read APFS. It's like, you got a damaged disk here. Let me reformat it for you. Linux, with their file system, can read pretty much all of them, I believe. But if you put the Linux file format into the Windows computer, it's going to go, I have no idea what this is. I can't read it. It must be a damaged disk. So that is much more, I would say, of A plus kind of questions. That's the next level. Again, Tech Plus feeds into A plus perfectly. So Tech Plus, just know the file formats and you're good to go. All right. Speaking of which, let's take a look at operating system utilities. Most users pretty much just want their computers to work, right? We just want them to work. Even though we can play with them and tweak them and configure them, sometimes we just want the bloody things to work and just get things done. But the reality is that sometimes we have to tweak things, sometimes we have to perform housekeeping things, sometimes we have to fix things, and that is where utilities come in. So every operating system comes with installed utilities and system tools that are going to help us to configure, troubleshoot, and all this other stuff. We're not going to go into the individual utilities. We're going to go into the families of them because, again, one, we don't have the time, and two, this is much more of an A plus kind of scenario for some of these. So with Windows, we have a whole bunch of utilities, and you can get there by right-clicking on things. You can get there through the control panel. You can get there through Windows System, Windows Admin Tools, Device Manager, and something called the MMC, otherwise known as the Microsoft Management Console. Right-clicking, again, is a very powerful tool. It does a lot that you would not expect because it's very contextualized. If you right-click, for example, on the Start button, you get a very powerful menu with all sorts of options for admin. If you right-click on applications, if you right-click on icons, if you right-click on folders, you get a lot of admin tools just hiding right there. So right-clicking, very, very powerful. We have Control Panel, lots of programs called applets. These are individual kind of isolated applications on your computer. These are in the control panel, and chances are when you open up control panel, you're going to see what's called category view. We want something either large icon or small icon that gives us much more power and a lot more options. We have Windows System. It's a collection of utilities found in the Start menu. We're looking at Windows 10 here. Windows Administrative Tools, depending on what version of Windows you have, as well as what your permissions are, you can see some tools you can't see. These are a collection of incredibly powerful tools, incredibly powerful utilities that really allow you admin control of your computer. Things like setting up user accounts, setting up special passwords, setting up password permissions and things like that. Device manager, we looked at device manager a minute ago, or a few minutes ago, I should say. This is what controls your hardware or translates to your hardware. You can see if drivers are working, if things are even being seen. The MMC is basically your little toolbox. It allows you to put snap-ins of different tools. It is very customizable, and you can really play around with things. Now, let me kind of pause here and tell you a little story time for you. So when I was teaching this back in 04 to 08 at the CATE Center, the Korean Technology Education Center, I was showing students about the MMC. Well, the MMC, again, you can put in different snap-ins. So like a tech can have their favorite tools, or for the job, they have things that they run over and over again. Instead of having to search each one of them down, they can create an MMC and save it, put it on a thumb drive, put it on a network drive, whatever. Anywho, I come to work one morning and my principal calls me right in to his office. He goes, "Hey, Mr. Ford, come here."
What's wrong?
I felt a great disturbance in the force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
So I'm like, "Okay, what's going on?" He goes, "Well, one of your students is being suspended." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. What? One of my students is being suspended?" He goes, "Yeah." And he shows me a screen capture from network admins from the district. And my 16-year-old boy, student, had put on the shared network folder for the school, for his account, because all the students back then had a shared account on the school network, and he called it hacking tools. He's 16 years old. He's in a computer maintenance class. I took a look at what was in the folder because they had follow-up because, this kid was going to be in trouble. He was going to be suspended, all this other stuff. I'm looking through his hacking tools, and in there is like ClamWin, which is a portable anti-malware software thing you can put on a thumb drive. MMC thing that he created, which like had scan disk and defrag, and just basically they were tools that I told them to use that they were using to work on computers. And my whole response was, we're not suspending him for this. He's a 16-year-old kid. He's learning about computers. He wants, hacking kind of guy. So, I've got the movie poster Hackers like right behind the camera here. And he was just being a kid. He was excited about what he was learning. I love that enthusiasm. He was loving what he was learning. He wanted to put it into practice. And he called it hacking tools. And so I told our principal, who was a fantastic man, the guy, Bodie Wagner, will always have a place in my best people I've ever worked for list in my entire life. And I'm like, Bodie, we're not suspending this guy. He's not being suspended. I'm like, every one of these tools, if you suspend him, you got to fire me, because every one of these tools we use in class, every one of them. His mistake was calling it hacker tools on a network drive. I said, and then my follow-up question is how good are our IT people if they're looking at this list and they don't know what these tools are? Maybe they should sit for my class. So he wasn't going to get suspended. He didn't get suspended. But when he came to class that day, I made a point to talk about this. And I told him flat out, I said, I defended you once. I said, but if you do this again, I'm going to let them suspend you, not because you're trying to hack the network, but because if you're that dumb, you deserve to be punished. And we're friends to this day, 20-something years later. By the way, when this happened, my oldest, who is now moderating my room, was in diapers. So that tells you how long ago it was. But anyways, good stuff. That's why I love doing this. I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm making money. That's why I love doing it, to help folks and come up and collect stories. Anyway, so that's the MMC. Let's take a look at the macOS utilities. So Apple makes the computers and their operating system. Something to know about Mac and Apple in general is Apple is a hardware company that makes programs and applications for their devices. macOS works on Apple devices. They don't have to worry about a bajillion other computers trying to run their operating system. So they get the reputation of being more stable because, they control the hardware it's on. So Windows and Linux has to deal with a ton of different devices. macOS just works on their own device. So they don't come out of their box with a lot of different tools. There are some utilities, and there's also a healthy third market company where you can, or third markets or third party, I should say, where you can find different tools to run on your Mac. But you can see them here. And Linux utilities, I am not even going to get into this because Linux has so many distros and so many utilities. Good luck trying to categorize them all. Okay, that is it for the presentation. Woohoo! We got through it. Hallelujah. Thanks for hanging with me. I got one last, before you chime out, before you all leave, we got one last Kahoot for you. So that's how we're going to end tonight. Before we do that, a couple housekeeping items. One, hopefully, we'll be back at our home that I wanted to do these at. I found out, so I've had a YouTube account before Google bought YouTube. Been on YouTube for a long time. And I created this brand new account under, here it is right here. I created this account under my primary account. So if you have an account, you can create another YouTube account. So I made this under my primary YouTube account, thinking I could avoid some of the stuff that new people have to deal with, like verifying that you are a real person. And so when I tried to do a live stream today to test it, I got the whole 24-hour countdown. But hopefully, fingers crossed, this will be working and this will be the home for the live streams come tomorrow. And we're going to be doing live streams Tuesday, Wednesday. I think I've sent out the information from 6 to 8. Again, if you can't make it, you can watch them on YouTube. We'll go smoother than today. Today we had some growing pains and some technology pains, but we pushed through. We got through. But hopefully we'll be back on our original YouTube channel tomorrow. We're going to be doing this from 6 to 8, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I think Tuesday. So we're going to be doing this for 2 or 3 weeks or so. For those of you working in your Tech Plus certification, for those of you working on your Tech App certification, or for those of you who just want to know, you're more than welcome to join us. I love doing this. I love sharing this knowledge. So by all means, please join us. Okay, and with that, we're going to hop into our final Kahoot. So this is Kahoot number 2, the second portion. So, like before, let me get my game host voice on. You can scan the QR code or enter the PIN. You go to kahoot.it, enter the game PIN or scan the QR code. It is currently 7:54 my time on my computer. We will start at 7:56, so we'll give you guys about 2 or so minutes to hop into this Kahoot. So once again, scan the QR code or enter the game PIN. I can see how long the delay is, by the way, because I launch it like nobody's joining. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, there we go. There's the delay. All right. We're going to close it down in just a second here and get going. All right, let's start the game. Here we go. Operating Systems Part 2. 10 questions like before. First question, which operating system is developed by Apple for Mac computers? That, of course, is macOS. All right. Next question, number 2. Which operating system family is known for having many different distributions, such as Ubuntu? Hopefully you guys are looking at the questions on your phone or your devices and not on the screen, because there is a delay. That would be Linux. All right, Adventurous Elk is in the lead. Question number 3. What is the Windows tool commonly used to manage hardware devices and drivers? That, of course, is Device Manager. All right, Mighty Dove taking the lead on this one. Next question, number 4. What is the name of the command line application used in Mac OS? That, of course, is Terminal. All right, next question, number 5. Double points. Still anybody's game. In Windows, which command is commonly used to list files and folders in the current directory? In Windows, what command is commonly used to list files and folders in the current directory? That is dir. All right, next question. Number 6. Double points, still anybody's game. In Linux or Mac OS, which command is commonly used to list files and folders? That is ls for list. All right, next question. Question number 7. Which file system is commonly used by modern Windows computers? That is NTFS. Mighty Dove is still in the lead. Question number 8. For double points, which file system is commonly associated with many Linux systems? We just talked about this quite a bit, actually. That would be ext4, extension 4. Magnetic Hummingbird jumping to the lead. Question number 9. What is the main purpose of OS utilities, operating system utilities? Help manage, configure, or troubleshoot the system. All right, looks like we're on our final question. Number 10, Geek Alert. In Doctor Who, what is the Doctor's time-traveling ship called? The answers are coming in a little slower on this one. It, of course, is the TARDIS. All right, let's see what our points look like. Coming in 3rd place, Mighty Dove. Coming in 2nd place, Magnetic Hummingbird. And coming in 1st place, Congratulations, Adventurous Elk. All right. Thanks you all for hanging out with me tonight. We'll be back tomorrow from 6. There we go. We'll be back again tomorrow from 6 to 8 to do more review. We may be doing applications or one of the other ones, but we got lots of stuff left to go over. Remember, if you do miss a live stream, they are recorded automatically in YouTube, so you can watch them there. And again, I want to thank you all for being here with us and participating. Thank you for some amazing questions, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right. Bye, everybody.